If you heard that, there's no cake on my mouth, is there? It's because I was eating some of the Blue Mountain birthday cake, which we celebrated on Saturday. Welcome everyone to the House of Meditation and the Monday night meditation service. Glad you could join us. Namo Furugosa, Namo Furugosa, Namo Furugosa. Let us celebrate the liturgy of the day. Let us share the peace. May all beings awaken to that peace which is our true home. Let us take refuge. I take refuge in the ground of being, within which I live and move and breathe. Let us make the accord. I take sanctuary in the heart of being, accepting all of my delusions in thought, word, or deed, born of ignorance, hatred, and greed. Let us give thanks. I give thanks for all things, awakening to the intra-being of all nature. May my heart be open and my mind clear. May all be free from suffering and the causes of suffering, and may all come to know that peace which is born of insight and understanding. Since it is the practice of enlightenment, that practice has no beginning. And since it is enlightenment within the practice, that realization has no end. Welcome, everyone. I just wanted to say a quick note about the bells. Some of you have been watching and joining us for quite some time now. Often I will go outside and ring the bell that's in the back area of the temple grounds. But sometimes inclement weather requires us to do it inside, so we will use the gong. We can also use the wooden fish at times. If you ask, why do we do that? Why do we do that at the beginning? And the bell, or the sounding, is supposed to be the voice of the Buddha calling us back to our home, our true selves. So it's a way of gathering and bringing everyone together. So tonight's reading or quote is from the Boys in Pink Floyd. Money, so they say, is the root of all evil today. And that's from the song Money. So I've been doing and covering chapters from my newest book, which if you haven't gotten, it's actually on Kindle now, so you can save a little bit of money that way. The Three Principles of Oneness, How Embodying the Cosmic Perspective Can Liberate Your Life. And we're in the section now of the book called Ask Sensei. And so what I'm doing is I'm responding to questions that our members and people bring in, and I give you my opinion from my perspective and my practice. So this question today was, Dear Sensei, how can we have a mindful relationship to or with money? So that's a really good question. I mean, I think it's one of those questions that I unfortunately don't get asked very often. And I think the reason for that is because there's a disconnect for a lot of people between spirituality and economics. And it's a similar disconnect that I find between sexuality and spirituality. People assume that there's some kind of disconnect there, and that reflects a very basic duality of the way we look at things, which from the Buddhist perspective is not clear. That both economic needs and sexual needs are normal and things that we all have. And things that a lot of us spend a great deal of time focused on. And so the idea that spirituality wouldn't really address these questions, or would only see these things in like either, you don't really think about sexuality or money and you're very spiritual, or that's all you think about. And the Buddhist perspective is different. And so that's what I'm going to share with you tonight. And this idea of this duality is replete throughout our culture. And we have these, famous stories of it, like one of my favorite Christmas stories is A Christmas Carol, But that story itself focuses on the idea that somehow that wealth is bad, or people that have wealth are bad, or people that seek wealth are bad, and that our Christian background has told us to have a preference for the poor. And so we've especially in the Western world, we've come down with this sort of idea. But the enlightened perspective does not agree with that. And actually, when you look at our quote tonight, our reading from Pink Floyd, even that quote is incorrect. The source of that quote is found in the Gospels, the canonical Gospels of the Christian faith. And it is not that money is the root of all evil. In the Gospels, it is the love of money is the root of all evil. So let's clarify that first, that even within the Christian tradition, it's really the attachment that we have to money that is the problem. Now, I don't believe that the love of money is the root of all evil. That's not a Buddhist concept. That's a concept that you will find in many theistic traditions, but it certainly isn't ours. And I'll tell you why. My own opinion as a teacher, based on my understanding of the Buddha's teachings, is that the root of all evil actions, because we're very careful also when using the word evil, that evil is not an ontological statement. We're not making a statement about a person's being or a thing's ontology, like money. What we're saying is that evil actions, the root of all evil actions, is the sense of separation that we have. It's the delusion that I am separate. This delusory condition is a sort of mental myopia. And what it does is make us think that we don't have, that everything is outside of us and we somehow have to grasp after it. And if we can't get what we think we need through healthy channels, loving relationships, friendships, familial connections, nurturing, then we're still going to want it. But we're going to do it differently. We're going to use other means to try to achieve that sense of connection. And those other needs or those other ways of doing that can relate and become primarily relationships around power. That I will seek power, not to liberate, but I will seek power to control. Very, very important distinction. That I will seek power not to liberate, but to control. Because that control is an unconscious drive to have that connection. And it's quite insidious. Now, most of the time when you talk about wealth or you talk about economics, the term greed is brought up. And greed is what's called the three poisons of the mind in Buddhism. The others being delusion and hatred. And what do we mean by greed being a poison of the mind? We mean that it is a destructive and deadly force in our consciousness, that it leads to great suffering. not just for ourselves, but for others. So what is the Buddhist point of view? Well, the Buddhist point of view is that greed is not relegated to just talking about economics or talking about things. That greed is a state of a delusory mind that can involve any time we feel like we don't have that connection. We don't have enough. So I need to get it. And the need to get it, no matter what, is greed. Greed is never learning how to be satisfied with what I have. Greed is always having an exaggerated expectation on the things that I want. But the fact is, from our perspective, that whatever object of desire we have, a person, place, or thing, the desire is not the problem. The problem is the expectation we have upon getting that thing. We think that if we have that thing, then we'll be happy. If we have that thing, then we'll be satisfied. If we have that thing, then that will take away all the bad. And that's the problem. So the problem isn't having desires. Desires are natural. Desires can be very good. The desire to be awakened from your suffering, for example. But it's the exaggerated attachment we have to them. That's what causes the suffering. And likewise, aversion to them. I would say that when it comes to economics, most people are either in an aversion or attachment mode. They either are seeing that as the cure-all for everything in their life, or they have an aversion to it. That somehow money is bad. Wealth is bad. That is not the Buddhist point of view. And it is not an inherent function of money. There was a study that was carried out by several groups back in 2018, and they were trying to find out, based on some different psychological Q&As that they gave to over 10,000 people, was to find out what their personal satisfaction point or their satiety point was. And they wanted to do it specifically related to income. And here's the interesting thing they found. It was actually much more than 10,000 people. They found that after a person has a certain level of income, money is no longer associated with contentment or happiness. And interestingly, that amount of money is not as great as people might think. Roughly the range for an individual today, so that was 2018, is somewhere around $50,000 a year for an individual and around $110,000 to $120,000 for two people. Now I know for a lot of people that seems like a great deal, but the fact of the matter is that's very close to what we might call the middle class. And that they found that if a person had even, I think what was the number, if a person had 102,000 as the average satiation point, a family making 120,000 per year was not less psychologically sated than the one making 200,000 a year. So there was a point where it just wasn't associated with personal contentment or satisfaction. And I have experienced that. I have worked with people who were homeless and had nothing, and I've worked with people that have had immense amount of wealth. And I can tell you it's true. It's very true. And it's interesting to me that although it's been much maligned by Marxist theory, the so-called bourgeois middle class is kind of a sweet spot. It's kind of a spot where we can learn to focus on other things. And to be clear, making less than that satiation point for most people means that money and economics is like the major player in their daily concerns and worries. And so what that tells us is that being poor from the Buddhist perspective is nothing to hold up. And neither is being super wealthy. Both can have an aversion or an attachment to money. Both can succumb to that poison of the mind. And because economic stress can be so destructive, historically, Buddhism actually fostered the idea of, what's the right word for it? I guess you would say prosperity. It actually encouraged prosperity. And at the end of the day, it said that whether one is creating wealth or one has chosen intentionally, not being forced into it, but intentionally from inside, has chosen to live with less, that both are good. One is not better than the other. And many Buddhist communities engaged in creative entrepreneurial practices. And during the early movement of Buddhism, it was completely reliant on wealthy patrons. So we just don't have those teachings. So what did the Buddha emphasize? First of all, he emphasized a very practical and creative approach to money. He advised that we do work that was in harmony with our deepest spiritual reflection. That we try to do work that aligns and harmonizes with the expression of our truest self. He advised that we set aside funds for our needs and wants. So I've often said, you see the signs, sometimes the neon signs, Jesus saves. Well, Buddha saves too, but he wants you to save money for a rainy day. He wants you to put aside money for when times are lean. And he recommended that. He actually speaks about these things. He never thought of these things as dirty or untouchable. Just like everything else, he was very practical. Understanding the human, not debasing it. He believed that we should save money to build up our businesses or our careers. That we prepare sometimes for economic challenges. That we avoid gambling. That we avoid gambling. That we avoid carelessly throwing money away on things that we have very little opportunity to experience a return. So you might say he's a bit conservative on that level. He, of course, talked about greed. But he also talked about something that I think is just as important, and that's idleness. He taught that idleness was not good for the human being. That idleness, what's the old saying? The idle mind is the devil's workshop. That the idle mind, the idle person, that would only lead one into areas that probably would have them stumbling down lanes of suffering. So he was positive about having work or having something to do. And he believed that work was important to our well-being. It wasn't just something we did because we had to do it, but rather it was something we did because it was good for us. We needed it. I always think of Caesar Milan, the dog whisperer,
And he would always say, you know, your dog needs a job. It needs to feel like it's contributing in some way. Well, we're like dogs. We like to know we can contribute in some fashion. It helps us. And finally, he advised us to find ways to creatively use our wealth to help others. And that's why he would often foster prosperity. And he would say, yes, build prosperity. You can do so much good with it. So much good. And he advised that along with creating prosperity, one should create generosity. That one should not hold on to money. To be stingy with it. Because he taught that stinginess was an attachment. And back into the old attachment aversion cycle. So in essence, the Buddha's statement was that one can mindfully create wealth or intentionally live on less, like so many of those who were forest dwellers and later the monastics. But either way, it's okay. But don't pretend that you live in one world and not the other. Even the monastic communities, they couldn't have functioned on their own. You go back to the earliest days of Buddhism, if it wasn't for the socially and culturally accepted idea of almsgiving, you know, people begging and everybody giving them something, they couldn't have survived. And if it wasn't for the wealth of Shakyamuni's father and then later other wealthy patrons, he couldn't have built his community. He recognized the practicality of that. And whenever Buddhism went into Northern Asia, and it didn't have a underpinning economically, well, they had to become entrepreneurs, which is exactly what they did. They became entrepreneurs. They created businesses. They created a way to sustain themselves. So, I hope that's clear. Now, I'm going to give you my own simple recipe. And I'm not perfect, so there are times where I haven't followed this completely. They're just like everyone else. There are times where I've been caught up in what I didn't have and living out of that sense of poverty of spirit and mind. And then there are others where I've been able to live out of that sense of prosperity. So I encourage the latter. So here they are. There's 5 of them. Number 1, learn to really focus on and enjoy the simple pleasures of life. If there's one thing that this practice does, is it makes that personal satisfaction or sated point much easier to experience. much, much easier to experience. And you start to appreciate and realize that it's actually the simple pleasures that matter at all. I remember one of my very wealthy students who had, a great deal of money, great deal of things. When we had a conversation one evening in the back of his mansion in San Francisco, and we talked about the things that really gave him pleasure, really, really gave him pleasure. It was incredibly simple. So that's what it's really about. And so the practices of the Dharma, the practices of mindfulness, man, they allow us to feel the pleasures that come from being aware and come from mindfully enjoying the moment. Last night we were at the drive-ins, and we love going to the drive-ins. And I've been so glad to see the drive-ins sort of flourishing a bit more under this crisis. And I was sitting there last night, and it was a beautiful, clear sky. It was at night, right now we're in the season where you have Saturn and Jupiter and the moon, almost like in a triangle. And I held up my hot dog on its bun. And I said, thank you. Eat it up. And in that moment, I had this flash back to my ancestors 200,000 years ago, gathered around a fire, looking up at that same astronomical phenomenon. And I thought, man, this is good. This is good. This is what it's all about. Being with my loved ones, enjoying a drive-in hot dog at a drive-in theater. I mean, why else do we work for everything? I mean, think about that. Next time you ask yourself a question about that, why are you trying to get to that goal? What is it that you want from that goal? It's probably a lot easier to achieve than you think. Number 2, don't take on debt for things you don't really need. That's a hard one to do, especially when credit cards are so easily available. You know, where you can get all kinds of money at high usury. And we're all guilty of it. And in some ways, you can't even get good credit unless you have one of the bloody things, right? Unless you have something, you can't really get credit for other things. So just try that. You know, don't be hard on yourself. With any of this stuff, don't be judgmental. Don't be hard on yourself. Just try to mindfully take some basic steps. And try not to take on debt for things you don't really need. My wife has an excellent practice for this. She will go into a store and she'll have her cart or her bag, and she'll put things she wants in that cart. And then she'll roam around the store. And she finds so often by the time she gets to the point where it's time to purchase it, she doesn't need it anymore. But she allows herself to want it, to see it as it is. Step 3, regardless of how you support yourself, do so from a place of service to others. I don't care what you do. Try to find a way to see it as a way that you are in service to others. Because if you can match what you do, whatever that is, with some altruistic end, it will lift up everything that you do. It will give a greater meaning to what you do than just you. It's a way of opening yourself up to something larger than yourself and having that spirit of giving, of service every day. Step 4, when possible, aid those who are sick and unable to work. That's part of the nice thing about being prosperous. If you have, and there are those who, for whatever reason, are unable to have, those who are sick or those who are infirm, those who are unable to work, do things to help them. Human societies have been doing that forever. Do things to help them. Because there are always going to be people in society or any culture who aren't going to be able to do those things. And it might be us someday. But it's a good attitude. It's a great attitude to have this desire to be helpful to others who cannot help themselves. And 5, and this is a big one. I'm 57. So I'm looking at probably, 10 years probably till I would receive some kind of, what do the British call it? pension. You call it Social Security, they call it pension. They're pensioners. Let go of the idea of retirement. Let it go. Let go of the idea of ever being at a time where you will not work. Embrace an attitude of lifelong giving. I am never going to retire. As long as I am able, I will work. As long as I am able. And I never give too much thought to the idea of retirement. And honestly, it's like a paraphrasing of that old John Cougar Mellencamp song, where it was like growing old leads to dying, and that doesn't sound like much fun. Retirement usually leads to that. I can't tell you the number of scores of people who retire and then suddenly they all get sick. And they're waiting until that age to sort of enjoy themselves. That is insane. So don't do it. Put it out of your head. That doesn't mean you shouldn't save, like the Buddha suggested for times maybe when you won't be able to work. But don't think about retirement. You have something to offer. I don't care what age you are. As I said on Saturday at Oban, go from the idea of aging to saging. How am I going to sage as I get older? I look forward to being a wise old wizard like Gandalf. And I may not have anything to offer but my words. But as long as I am able, I will do so. So, I hope that you found that useful. I hope that that is clear, and that you will take the time to reflect and contemplate your own relationship to life. The moment we receive true and trusting, solid and clear like a diamond, infinite light and life embrace and protect us, liberating us completely. Let us say together the four immeasurable vows. Sentient beings are numberless, I vow to liberate them. Delusions are endless, I vow to end them. The ways of compassion and wisdom are boundless, I vow to embody. The way is unattainable, I vow to attain it. Let us take the precepts for the community of the vow. I allow my true self to manifest in all aspects of life. I take complete responsibility for my own life and all of my actions. I affirm my personal being and acknowledge it as a path to awakening and freedom. I embrace all aspects of my personal being, including my shadow, so that they may be transformed. I affirm an attitude of openness to my true self, even in the midst of suffering. We will now begin the incense offering and the sharing of the mantra. Tonight we will chant the Nembutsu together. So at your home altars, please make your offering at this time as well. After the offering is completed, we will have a period of just being or abiding. knowing that we never truly practice alone, or just for ourselves. Let us make the offering of the Bodhisattva Gata. We dedicate this practice to the welfare of all beings throughout space and time. May it always be so. Nam. 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 Thank you. That concludes tonight's meditation service. I hope that you find it helpful. If you can, please donate by going to AskSenseiTony.com and clicking on the Dragonfly Sangha page. I would also remind folks that if they would like to have private personal direction, that is available. You can contact me again through that webpage. And also, if you've ever considered living a life in teaching and sharing the Dharma, then you might want to consider our seminary program. Thank you.